On Sunday nights, we are in a continuing study on the book of Revelation, and what we've done after about 40 or so weeks in the book, I've kind of moved into an area of prophecy, and I'm going to try to finish this up in these next 4 or 5 weeks. I don't know how many takes we've got on Revelation, 40 or 45 over the last 45 weeks on Sunday night. But I'm talking about what's going to happen at the end of time. And I saw a special on TV here back a few years ago, and Leonard Nimoy was he was Mr. Spock on Star Trek. He does a lot of things because he was on that space show, and they have him doing space things. And he was talking about an asteroid hitting the Earth. And I wrote something out here. If there's any possibility that an asteroid is going to destroy the earth without God fulfilling His biblical program, then all of the Bible is a lie, and we have no purpose here on earth. There is no heaven, there is no hell, there is no eternal life, and it doesn't matter. The theory that an asteroid will destroy the earth before the end, when God takes out His church, this is free will. It is a fairy tale like Cinderella and Dracula. You can't believe this theory and the Bible at the same time. I would like to assure the scientists that this doomsday asteroid is impossible that they talk about. They talk about saving the planet when this happens. Let me ask you, can you change the plan of God when you say that at the end, which He has planned, when the Bible says that He knows, all known unto God are all His works from the beginning, and that He has determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. He's determined the timing of all things, and it's all written down for us in the Bible. He will melt the elements with fervent heat. Worrying about an asteroid hitting the earth is no problem. In 1996, an asteroid missed the earth as close as the moon that had more power than the entire nuclear arsenal of all the nations on earth. It had more explosive power and would cause more destruction than detonating all the Earth's nuclear warheads at the same time. If you get worried that the Earth is going to be destroyed by a meteorite, call me. I will ease your mind. God is going to take His church out at the last trump, at the end of time, without the earth will be destroyed before that time, without it being destroyed before then. And the fact that somebody says that is ignorance, and that missing us by the length of here to the moon may as well have been on the other side of the universe. God's using that just to throw a scare into some people. Well, He's going to throw scares into the unbelievers, because there's some things going to happen at the end of time that's going to frighten men so their hearts are going to fail them for fear, for looking after all those things that are coming upon the earth. And we've been talking about the earth becoming hardened of heart, and they're not believing God, and they're not believing the truth. And the Bible says there in Proverbs 29, he that being often reproved hardeneth his neck shall be suddenly destroyed, and that without remedy. And that word without remedy is the word marpe, M-A-R-P-E, and that word means with no cure, no way out. It is the Old Testament word for the word that we find over here in the 25th verse, 25th verse of the 21st chapter of Luke. Now we see in the 21st chapter of Luke, we see Israel encamped by armies in verse 20. And God said, when you see this happen, Jerusalem encamped by armies in verse 20. And when Jerusalem is encamped by armies, that came about in 586 BC. And even during the days of Jesus, During the days of Jesus, the garrisons of the Roman soldiers were encamped in and all around Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, Israel, was not a state at that time. It was merely Judah and Benjamin, the southern kingdom. They were the only ones that were back from the captivity. No part of northern Israel. Therefore, Israel was not back from the captivity. And then, of course, we know that they have been under these armies for 2,600 years up until May the 14th, 1948. Now, God said He's going to bring 4 judgments. He's going to bring the sword, the famine, the pestilence, and the beast. Now, the reason God's going to bring these, He's when man stiffens his neck. Now, God not only destroyed Israel with these, He also destroyed the beast with these. He would take one beast, He would take Assyria, which was usually equated along with Babylon. They were, the writers equate them as the same, and they were destroyed. Of course, Babylon overthrew Assyria, but Babylon was overthrown, and Babylon is the lion there in Daniel 7, and Babylon was overthrown by Persia, the Persia-Mede Empire. Persia-Medes, that was a dual empire, and that's the two-horned goat of Daniel, the 8th chapter, two-horned goat. And this is the bear, and that was, Babylon was overthrown by the bear, and the bear was overthrown by Greece, and that's equated as a leopard, and then Greece was overthrown by Rome, which is a composite of these 3. Now, God said, if He overthrew them and He kept breaking the beast because of how they had polluted Israel, carried him into captivity, God tells Israel, if you go after Baal in the grove, if you go after the sun god, the Ashtaroth, the female deities, or if you go after Moloch or Molech, whatever generic name you had for them, Baal was just a generic name in Israel, or if you go after the grove, if you go after other gods, I want to send these judgments on you. But He speaks of these same judgments as going against Egypt. They're starting at about the 44th chapter of Jeremiah, when Jeremiah is standing in the streets of Jerusalem pronouncing judgment. He also pronounces these judgments on Egypt, and upon Ammon, and upon the Gentiles, and upon Moab. And Jeremiah will say against Moab, because Moab worshipped Shemash and polluted Israel with Shemash God. Ammon, northern Jordan. Moab is southern Jordan. Ammon is northern Jordan. And they caused Israel to go after Shemash from Moab and after Molech from northern Jordan, which was back then the land of Ammon. And God said, if you do this, I'm going to scatter you. And He says, there will be no remedy to what I do. Now, the whole world right now is rebelling against God. All the preachers are rebelling. All the business people are rebelling. All of these politicians are rebelling. There's rebellion in the schools. Jerry and Ben will get together and they'll talk about what rebellion, and how that Jerry teaches English, high school English, and he'll tell you that, I asked him one day, what percentage of your class do you believe wants the truth? And you said, I believe about 5%, or wants to learn something. He said about 5%. All the rest of them, most of them, a great majority of them are failing. The schools are failing. Listen to Jerry and Ben talk. Ben used to be a principal out here at Beach. And it's very distressing just to hear them talk about the school system. It makes you want to say, where can we go and hide? The Bible says there will be great distress of nations with perplexity. Let's read it one more time. And they, speaking of the Jews, in verse 24, Luke 21, they, the Jews, shall fall by the edge of the sword. That's usually the first judgment that's named. They'll fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. Led away captive has to do with the beast, doesn't it? That's pulling them up out of Israel. They'll fall by the sword first, and then these empires will lead them away captive, and they'll be trodden down underfoot, dying by the millions into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And people say, what is the times of the Gentiles? The times of the Gentiles in this context is the Jews being led away by the Gentiles, is the Jews in Jerusalem being encamped with armies in verse 20, and everyone fleeing for their lives in Israel, or in Judah, particularly in Jerusalem in verse 21. These are God's revenge upon His people, that He's going to use the Gentiles to crush them underfoot. Then we get on to verse 25. And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars. Now, I'm going to go into that maybe next week. I will say this. The sun determines the weather patterns. I'm going to bring that out. The sun determines the weather patterns, and the moon and the sun. The moon determines the tides, and the sun determines about 50% of the tides that the moon determines. It's because the moon is closer to the earth, and there are these magnetic pulls of gravity from one planet to the other, and what pulls the tides out, since the waters are not locked down, and this probably has something to do when we go from day to night, or the weather patterns change, it interferes with these. I've got a new book on oceans, and they're talking about the tides being pulled by the gravitational pull of the moon. The sun pulls the gravity of the tides, but it's so much further away. It's 93 million miles, and the moon is 252 million miles from us. And so the moon being that much closer has a greater gravitational pull. So when there is signs in the moon, that can very well be talking about the surface of the oceans, and that's exactly what's happening now down here in the Gulf. This is the first time I heard on one of the weathercasters said this is the first time in 50 years or something like that. Was it 100 years where they had four hurricanes hit the Gulf Coast all in the same month? It has been, that's a picture of the signs in the moon. And then the signs in the sun. The suns determine the weather patterns. That is what, let me read you something. Well, let me go ahead and read this first. There shall be signs in the sun and the moon and in the stars. And upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity. And the word perplexity is the word aporeomai, A-P-O-R-E-O-M-A-I. It means in a quandary. A quandary means you don't have any way out. You're trying to look for answers, and you have none. That's what it means. It means no answer, no way out. There's going to be distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Now, I don't believe that's allegorical. I believe that's actually what's going to be happening. That's bringing pestilence and famine. When the elements of our ecological system get out of balance, it affects everything. It affects the animal habitats. It affects their migration habits. It affects their breeding habits. It affects the flowers blooming either later or earlier in a lot of the tropical climates and in a lot of the Arctic and Antarctic of the world. And we've got that in some books here. And I'm going to bring out some of it. Men's hearts failing them for fear. This thing's going to keep multiplying, and I keep saying there are no answers. Men's hearts failing them for fear, for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud of heaven with power and great glory. And when these things, notice the word begin, not after they've been happening a long time, when these things begin to come to pass, what things are we talking about? The Gentiles treading down the Jews, in Jerusalem being trodden down, until the Gentiles cease to tread down Jerusalem underfoot. Not only is Jerusalem not being trodden underfoot anymore, but Israel is not being trodden underfoot because they're a world nuclear power. Then he says, when these things begin, what else? When what else begins? Signs in the sun, the weather patterns, going into an upheaval, the ecological systems turning upside down in convulsions in nature, and that's what we have. Distress of nations with perplexity. That's, the nations are perplexed, and men's hearts are failing them for fear. And then when he says down here in verse 32, verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all is fulfilled. The generation where the Gentile rule over Jerusalem ceases. That ceased from June the 5th through June the 10th of 1967 in the Six-Day War, when the first time in 2,600 years the Jews threw out the Jordanians who were ruling Jerusalem, and they started ruling Jerusalem. If you'll notice, this is saying Jerusalem shall be trodden down until the Gentiles no longer tread it down underfoot. Well, this is what we're talking about, distress of nations with perplexity. And what are some of these perplexing things that we'd like to put up on the board? How about the economy? That's not going to cure. You can forget that. When they talk about balancing the budget, they're the biggest bunch of liars in Washington you ever seen in your life. They're lying. Back in 1992, when Clinton first ran for the presidency, they said at that time we owed $1 trillion in a national debt. It wasn't within about 2 or 3 years they said we owed $3 trillion. $3 trillion. And they're saying now that we owe somewhere in the neighborhood of $13 trillion. Larry Burkett, who wrote the book, The Coming Economic Earthquake, he made a statement in his book. He said back in 92, he wrote his book in 91, right before we hit $1 trillion, he said every man, woman, and child in America owed on the national debt $300,000 apiece. Now, where are you going to get your $300,000 from, Brian? And where are the rest of you people going to get yours from? We know where Donald Trump's going to get his. And we know where H. Ross Perot is going to get his and where Bill Gates is going to get his. This is impossible. Now, what do you think it is down here? Mary saw a special, and Pat Patterson, who used to be on Clinton's staff, or was it Bush? I think it's Bush's staff. He said we owed closer to $47 trillion, a total impossibility to pay. Completely impossible. We are in a state of bankruptcy. Nobody's declared it up to this time. What they're talking about, somebody said something today, said when Bush entered office, was it you talking about it? Somebody said when Bush entered office, said, Clinton, we had a free debt and we had the budget was balanced. That is a lie. What they mean when they talk about balancing the budget, let's just say we do owe $13 trillion. They're talking about, what they're talking about is interest on $13 trillion. Let's just say this is the interest on $13 trillion. This is the amount of the interest. We do not bring in enough taxes to pay that. We bring in a certain amount, and you've still got an amount left that we don't have to pay the interest. That is called the deficit. That's called the deficit. And the deficit is an amount of money that we need to shuffle some bills or stocks around somewhere or sell some kind of stocks to foreign countries to make up that money right there so we can pay the interest every year on this $13 trillion. And then they say we balance the budget. They're a bunch of liars. I keep telling you, these guys are liars. So let's just put this up here. I did a tape several years ago called The Fall of the American Empire, and I went to a lot of the figures. I can't remember the figures, but we owed more on the deficit in 1991 than our entire national debt in 1960 when John Kennedy took office. Our entire debt was smaller than our deficit in our entire debt of 1960 was smaller than the deficit in 1991. Now, where do you think that we're going? Let's just put that up there. Here's something that there's no answer to. Economy. The Bible speaks of that, doesn't it? When the Bible speaks of the four horsemen of the apocalypse riding, we see the third horse, a black horse, with a man carrying the scales and saying a measure of wheat for a penny and 3 measures of barley for a penny. A penny was a denarius. That was a day's wages. That was a day's wages for a Roman soldier. Day's wages for a Roman soldier or a field hand or a field worker. What they're trying to show us there is that as these horsemen ride, that they're showing that 3 measures of barley. Measures of barley. Barley was the food that the poor men ate. That's oats, oatmeal. Wheat, 1 measure of wheat for a penny. They're showing that it's going to take, in 1 measure would feed a man for a day. A man could feed 3 in his family, work all day long to do that. What that's doing is giving us a ratio or a balance to show what it's going to cost as we get close to the end of time. There's going to be a great famine in the land. So let's put that down up here. Famine. Do we have famine in the world? Well, yeah. And are they going to cure this? When Larry Jones, first of all, don't give Larry Jones a nickel of your money. I wouldn't give him money long before that, before he came along. But when I saw him, I said, no, it's a trick and a gimmick. Larry Jones owns the trucking company and all the companies that ship this stuff, and he's the guy that makes the money off of it. And not more than 12 cents out of every dollar that you give to Larry Jones goes to these children over there overseas in these foreign countries. Don't believe those guys when they say they're sending money over there. I do not give money to these charities. Don't believe in them. First of all, why am I going to give to somebody who don't believe God? So, famine, that's what one of the judgments of God is, isn't it? God repeatedly said, I'll send the sword, the famine, the pestilence. And we've got so many diseases. I can't begin to tell you how much. I've got several books on these world diseases that's going on, and I'm not even going to go into them. But it's much more than Ebola. It's much more than AIDS. The United States government, I've got this one book by this one writer, and he says that it was the Department of Defense that funded the research behind the movement to create the AIDS virus so that we could put this into the water of the Russians and put it into their food, that we wanted something that would destroy their immune systems. But they were so senseless as to believe that they could do that and it wouldn't come home to roost. But they document this. One of the columnists and a man who is very educated in this field said It was created by the Department of Defense. Of course, are they going to tell us that? No, they ain't going to tell us that. So we're talking about, I had a lady that she worked, I knew her years ago, worked out here at Vanderbilt. She worked in one of the labs out there, checking out the different cultures. She said, we've got so many diseases coming in constantly that we can't even keep up with. They had one strep, was it strep? I believe it was a strep virus. They said that they would go into a hospital, take something that's supposed to kill this virus, put it in a petri dish, and it would adjust to that antibiotic, and it would start eating the antibiotic, and it would make it grow. All of these bugs and these microbes, they adjust. I asked one of my pharmacists one time, I said, what happens when, I said, why is it I can't take a shot of penicillin like I used to, and it'll cure my ailments like I did when I was a little kid in 1950. You giving me a shot of penicillin, and boom, I was up and ready to go, and I was feeling great. He said, because these little microbes, they're like mongrel dogs. He said they crossbreed and they keep crossbreeding, and he said they build up resistance to everything that comes along, and that he said they all hibernate, they go under the ground, and he said none of them ever go away. They just simply hide, and then they come out years later. And now the thing that used to kill them, now they eat it. Yeah. So how about disease and pestilence? We're not going to. There's a book called The Coming Plague. It talks about dozens of things that are equivalent or worse than AIDS. That'll kill you in 3 and 4 days. That'll congeal your blood in no time. So disease, there's no answer for that. Now these guys say, I have the answer, elect me for president. You knucklehead. If one of them would get up there and say, I don't have any answers, the Lord's coming, but I'll be the best leader I can till he gets here or till I die, I'd say, hey, not like this guy. If they would tell the truth, but they're not. So disease, that's here. And what about, these are not going to be conquered, are they? No. And then you've got Al-Qaeda's coming. It's like I said this morning, George Bush and all the Republicans, and I'm not a Democrat, but they're saying we're going to go over there and we're going to not only make freedom possible, we're going to force this freedom upon all the Islams, which their religion will not allow them to have democracy and capitalism, because they're completely committed to Allah. And they're going to keep coming. I said it this morning, they remind me of the Huns and the Gauls and the Goths and the Visigoths and the Mongols. They remind me of those hordes that went in and attacked the Roman Empire, and they were so overwhelming, and they were going into the Roman Empire. They didn't care if they were killed. They didn't care if you slaughtered them. And one writer I've been reading lately, he said, it's impossible to fight that kind of a war. You can't win it. And you can't. Every Muslim in the Middle East is willing to come over here and blow up as many of us as they can, and if they die, they don't care. They get to go to their heaven. How are you going to fight that? And that's what the Goths and the Visigoths did. They went into the Roman Empire, and, hey, like a bunch of old wild men, give me my sword and cut that woman apart and hey, give me that leg of lamb. You know, like a bunch of barbarians, that's what they were. They lived to eat and ride and kill. That's it. I think that's what Al-Qaeda is living to do. We're going to wake up one morning, and they're going to be on our shores. And you know what? We think they want to attack us. They don't care. If they commandeered a luxury liner, got a whole bunch of them with all kinds of, if they had a few with some nuclear power warheads, And they had all kinds of munitions, and they commandeered a liner, and they said, we're landing in New York City, and we're going to kill everything we can kill until we're dead. How are you going to fight that? Get the New York police out after them? The New York's finest? Yeah. Yeah, that'll really do a lot of good. Yeah. So all of this is coming. All of it's coming. War, that's incurable. All of this is what the Lord is talking about. It's incurable. And then we're talking about distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Nations are going to be perplexed with no way out. The sea and the waves are going to be roaring, and men's hearts are going to be failing them for looking after the things coming on the earth. Let's put sea and waves roaring. Sea and waves. Hurricanes. Tornadoes. Yes. Well, let's put down here ecological systems of the earth in an upheaval or in a convulsive state. Let me read to you something here I was going to read to you a while ago. When the Bible says that there'll be signs in the sun, I've got several books on the greenhouse trap, and I want to read something to you out of the greenhouse trap. I've read a little out of it already, and they're talking about, in every one of these books that I've got, here's one called The Greenhouse, the 200-year story of global warming. Then here's one, Population Explosion. These are written all by scientists. And then I've got one, The Next 100 Years, Shaping the Fate of the Living Earth. And I've got another one under here. But let me read something to you here. We're headed towards some hard times. Well, let me read 2 verses before I read this to you. Go over here to Revelation. I'm just going to give you some of these things and share some of the information that I have with you. Revelation, the 8th chapter. Revelation 8. And when we see the first trumpet, you got 7 angels with 7 trumpets, and we're going to be changed at the last trump. That's at the end of time in Revelation 10 and 7, Revelation 11 and 15. But the first angel sounds, and these 7 angels are the 7 spirits of the 7 churches, are the spirits, the Holy Spirit that's in the refined church. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. Now, that's specific compared to, if you'll notice, I'm going to compare that to the 144,000 in verse 14, chapter 14. In chapter 14, was it 14? I have drawn a blank. It's the wrong verse, I believe. I've got the wrong verse. I'll find it in a minute. I went off on the wrong. Hold on here. Oh, I can't find the verse I'm looking for. I just kind of went blank. Y'all have to excuse me. Go back to chapter 8. And the third part of the trees was burned up. And the second angel sounded, as it were a great mountain burning with fire, was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. And the third part of the ships were destroyed. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood. And many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Now, not only this is going to happen, but the fish in the seas are going to die. Look over here in the 16th chapter. Go to the 16th chapter. Oh, I know the verse I'm looking for here. Yeah, let me see here. Yeah, notice, turn back to chapter 8. Turn back to chapter 8. It was right across the column that I was looking for. I didn't know how to do that blank. A third part of the trees will burn up, and all green grasses burn up, verse 7. But look at the scorpions over here in chapter 9, verse 4. And it was commanded unto these scorpions, which are false teachers, that they should not hurt the grass of the earth. This curse of the fifth angel sounding is not going to be upon the grass of the earth, but the first angel sounding is going to be upon the grass of the earth. And that was one of the most feared things in the ancient world, was to have these locusts come and destroy all their crops, all of their wheat, all of their barley, all of their trees, just strip them bare. Neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. These are not going to hurt the grass and the trees, but this over here, the first angel sounded, a third part of the trees will burn up, and all green grass was burned up. So this is a picture of heat upon the earth. And I believe that this is talking about literal grass and trees in verse 7, because it specifies when it's not talking about grass and trees in verse 4 of chapter 9. Now let's go back to Revelation 16. Revelation 16. Revelation 16 and verse 8. And the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun. Now there's going to be signs in the sun. The sun determines the weather. And power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. Now this is not going to be some demon up in the sun shooting fire down. This is going to be the sun itself getting hotter and hotter, and the earth is getting hotter and hotter, and men were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which hath power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain, and blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and repented not of their deeds. Now, do I believe that this is the judgments that's coming upon the earth? Yes, I believe that, and I believe it's a heating up of the earth, and the earth is heating. The earth has heated up 1 degree in the last 100 years. You say, that doesn't sound like much to me. Well, there were 150 glaciers in Glacier National Park in 1910 when William Howard Taft, the President of the United States, dedicated that as a national park. 150 glaciers. It has reduced to less than 30 in these past nearly 100 years. Not quite, but 94 years. Has reduced to that. All of the ice is melting in Alaska, and Alaska itself is melting. Let me read to you from this greenhouse trap here. Remember, the sun's going to heat up, and there will be signs in the sun. Anybody who thinks the earth is not heating, you're not paying any attention. And most people want to complain about it, say, you're just trying to worship the earth like Al Gore. I don't worship nothing Al Gore worships. Don't worship the earth. I'm trying to tell you, Al Gore is trying to save the earth. I'm telling you, nothing's going to save it. Not Al Gore, any politician. I'm going to read to you one thing I read 2 weeks ago, because this is one of the key points of this whole book on the greenhouse trap by Francesca Lyman, scientist. Although scientists using these models can fairly accurately predict the degree of initial warming, given the presence of various greenhouse gases, they can't predict exactly how the rest of the system will react to the warming. What they're saying is usually you can go into a lab and you can come up with a way to have a lab experiment. But they're saying they don't have any way to determine how all these greenhouse gases are going to really affect the warming to any great degree. They know it's happening, and that it's going to continue to happen. Scientists just don't know, as renowned environmentalist Barbara Webb or Rene Dubas put it 2 decades ago, whether the tiny pebble that gets moved is all that wedges a great boulder securely against the mountain wall. What they're saying in here, they don't know if we're going to come to a step in this global warming thing where it's going to knock out this pebble that holds up this gigantic ecological system that's going to come crashing down on the people in the world. And he goes on to say, we overestimate our ability to predict. The scientific goal at this point is not to make predictions, but to discover if predictability is possible on seasonal to decadal scales. They said, we can't even tell if we can predict. We want to predict. We want to know if we can predict to predict. They don't even know what's going to happen. And it's been happening to a great extent. Broker says, this is one of the scientists, the greenhouse gas buildup has become an inescapable product of our civilization. Now, let me read to you here about the weather patterns issue from the sun. If there's signs in the sun, listen. Almost a third of the sun's radiation that reaches the top of Earth's atmosphere is reflected back into space. Another 20 to 25% of incoming solar radiation directly warms the atmosphere and clouds, which absorb the heat and then re-radiate it in all directions. The remaining 45% or so reaches Earth's surface either directly or as diffused radiation that the clouds and atmosphere have scattered. More than half the solar energy that reaches Earth evaporates water or melts ice and snow. The sun's energy also directly warms air and land surfaces. This process is called sensible heating. Such heat is transported, for instance, when warm, dry winds blow into cooler regions or when the bodies of water warm adjacent land masses. In this way, oceans and lakes buffer the climates of coastal regions, keeping temperatures more moderate than those found inland. In a nutshell, weather issues from the sun. That's their words here. If there's going to be signs in the sun and weather issues from the sun, could we say that there's going to be signs in the weather? Sure we could. The tropics are warm because more intense solar radiation falls in equatorial zones. Polar regions are cold because they receive less polar energy. The temperatures between the equatorial and polar regions drive the wind and water cycles that determine global weather patterns. Then he goes in, I'm skipping some places here. Historically, by cutting down forests, which we're doing all over the world, we're destroying millions of acres of the rainforest of South America. And you say, what is that to me? I told a guy this one time. He said, I'm going to be out of here. It ain't going to matter. I'm getting out in a pre-trib rapture. I said, you're stupid, dude. We get our oxygen from the plants through respiration and through the processes of the plants breathing off oxygen. That's where we get it from. By cutting down forests, overgrazing rangelands, or failing to let agricultural lands lie idle long enough to replenish their fertility. Guess what? That's what Israel did, didn't they? This isn't a religious book, but yet he's quoting the same thing Israel did when they had sabbatical years and they never kept them. It was because of their greed. Failing to let agricultural lands lie idle long enough to replenish their fertility, humankind has created deserts and wastelands by doing that. And when you create a desert, they tell us, these scientists tell us in these books, when you create a desert, or you create like they created out here in the Oklahoma Territory back in the early 1920s, when they created that Dust Bowl out there, it was because they had a bunch of ignorant farmers that wouldn't rotate their crops. And what it does, it burns the land up. And when the land burns up, the light reflects off the sun, burns all the clouds up, and it takes forever to get that land back in shape. As Rutgers biologist David Ehrenfeld writes of so-called desertification, when the vegetation is reduced, more light-colored, bare, sandy soil is exposed, and this increases the albedo or reflectivity of the landscape. That's just what I was told you. When the albedo increases, more sunlight is reflected, and the land becomes somewhat cooler. Air passing over this landscape is heated less than usual and tends to rise less. This, in turn, decreases cloud formation, which decreases rainfall. It burns up the clouds, which has no rain. And God's got an ecological system. He said, leave the land alone every 7 years, and Israel didn't. Lower rainfall prevents the regrowth of vegetation. The albedo increases further, etc. And so the deserts expand because of man's greed. Isn't that something? I'm going to stop on this, and I'm going to go over to, he speaks of the human fingerprint on the climate is obvious. Gosh, there's so much in this. I wish I had time to just read it all to you. But I want to read something to you out of the, he goes into El Nino in here. He talks about the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets contain enough water to raise sea level about 22 feet, while East Antarctic has enough ice to raise sea level over 190 feet. How far do you think, when you raise it that far, how far do you think the shore is going to go inland? In one of these books, they said for every foot, it goes inland like, I can't remember what it is, 10 to 15 feet. It goes inland. If you can imagine, it would destroy most of the seacoast towns all over the United States. And that's what they say is happening. And he goes on to say, especially hard hit would be Carolinas, where the slope of the shoreline is so gradual that 1 foot rise in sea level could push the shore back miles. 1 foot rise in Carolina. Well, what would 190 feet do to them? That would put the seashore close to Knoxville. Whew. Wouldn't that be something? Louisiana's prospects may be the most unsettling of all. According to EPA's Titus, the entire port of New Orleans might have to be moved. And he goes on into Louisiana's wetlands. 45% of this raise in the of the loss of the wetlands due to this heating of the Earth's surface would be in Louisiana. And just pull the seashore just in up about halfway up to Monroe. Mm-hmm. Did y'all get one of these? I tried to order some more. They were out of them down at Books A Million. I asked them if they could get me about 10 of them. I don't know if any of y'all might want one, but I'm trying to order some right now. But they're talking about, in this National Geographic, they're talking about devastation in this. They talk about what's going on in Alaska. They call it the big thaw. The climate is changing at an unnerving pace. How's that for a word in a science magazine? Unnerving. That's something you don't use in science magazines unless it's serious. Let me read a little bit to you out of this. Measuring how the Park Story glaciers are melting. I'll read this to you. I read it before, and I just quoted it a while ago. When President Taft created Glacier National Park in 1910, it was home to an estimated 150 glaciers. Since then, the number has decreased to fewer than 30, and most of these remaining have shrunk in area by 2/3. Faegre predicts that within 30 years, most, if not all, of the park's namesake glaciers will disappear. Well, if the Antarctic starts melting, and Alaska is already melting, it's the tundra, which is the permafrost that you walk on up there, it's already sinking. Some houses, they say in this article, let me read it to you here. NASA's repeated laser altimeter readings show the edges of Greenland's ice sheet shrinking. Spring freshwater ice breakup in the northern hemisphere now occurs 9 days earlier than it did 150 years ago. And autumn freeze-up 10 days later. Thawing permafrost has caused the ground to subside more than 15 feet in parts of Alaska. That means if you own a house on level ground, your windows to the bottom floor can be down in the ground somewhere about 6 or 8 feet in the ground. And that's what's happening. I've got a film called Alaska's Melting, and it's very frightening to watch. From the Arctic to Peru, from Switzerland to equatorial glaciers of Iranian Jaya in Indonesia, massive ice fields, monstrous glaciers, and sea ice are disappearing fast. This combination of effects has played the major role in raising average global sea level between 4... Let me flip over here. Between 4... Well, that's the wrong page. Between 4 and 8 inches in the past 100 years, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The recent rate of global sea level rise has departed from the average rate of the past 2,000 or 3,000 years and has risen more rapidly, about 1/10 of an inch a year. A continuation or acceleration of that trend has the potential to cause striking changes in the world's coastlines. In southern Louisiana, coasts are literally sinking by about 3 feet a century. A process called subsidence, a sinking coastline, and a rising ocean combine to yield powerful effects. It's like taking the global sea level rise problem and moving it along fast forward. Never before have so many humans lived so close to the coast. More than 100 million people worldwide live within 3 feet of mean sea level. Vulnerable to sea level rise, Tuvalu, a small country in the South Pacific, has already begun formulating evacuation plans. Megacities concentrated near coastal plains or river delta, Shanghai, Bangkok, Jakarta, Tokyo, and New York are at risk. Bangladesh are potentially catastrophic. The scenarios are disturbing even in wealthy countries like the Netherlands, with nearly half its landmass already at or below sea levels. This sounds like some doomsday prophet. It doesn't sound like National Geographic, does it? It's coming. Bruce Douglas, a coastal researcher at Florida International University, calculates that every inch of sea level rise could result in 8 feet of horizontal retreat. That was it. 8 feet of horizontal retreat. For every, not foot, every inch. Every inch. And what was it if the glaciers melt in the Antarctic? 190 feet. Take each one of those, multiply that by 12, and then multiply that by 8 feet. That's going to put the coastlines 200 and 300 miles inland, isn't it? They're painting a picture that's not pretty. Yeah. And could result in 8 feet of horizontal retreat of sandy beaches, shorelines due to erosion. And they go on and on with this. Let me just give you something else here. They're showing the 1 degree of change, what happens. We've had 1 degree in the last 100 years. They say this is utterly disastrous because we hadn't had that kind of change in 1,000 years before that. The 20th century has been the greatest warming in at least 1,000 years. This is what the Bible teaches is going to happen, doesn't it? And natural forces can't account for it all. The rise of CO2 and other carbon dioxide and other heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere has contributed. Both greenhouse gases and temperature are expected to continue rising, and it's all of our automobiles, all of our aerosol cans, all of our gases of every kind, all of the methane, the water vapors, they're burning the ozone up. The Arctic is warming several times faster than most of the planet. That's what we're afraid of. That's where it's going to cause the shorelines to rise. Ice there is melting on land and at sea. The release of fresh water on the oceans could change the course of currents that play a vital role in climate. Runoff glaciers on land is already contributing to a global rise in sea level. In the next century, some coastlines, if it's around then, could migrate miles inland, displacing tens of millions of people, and that's a conservative estimate. Alaska is getting hotter. And they got all kinds of pictures in here of all the fires they're having in Alaska because it's burning up. It's like a tinderbox up there. It's drying up. The trees are dying. It's causing the change of the habits of all these kind of insects. One place they got millions of acres of these trees that the insects have killed off, and that just makes for, like I said, a tinderbox ready to go up in smoke. Alaska is getting hotter. In 3 decades, the average temperature rose 4.16 degrees Fahrenheit in the northern city of Barrow. The capital, Juneau, saw a 3.54 degree increase, and that's astronomical. They say 1 degree can be catastrophic. In Anchorage, the state's most populous city, is 2.26 degrees warmer. Computer models predict that carbon dioxide-induced warming could eventually raise the incidence of fires by more than half. Alaska's spectacular glaciers, among them Buckskin Glacier in Denali National Park and Preserve, are disappearing. An estimated 23 cubic miles of water now runs off each year. 23 cubic miles of water off of this one spot. The largest glacial contribution to sea level rise on Earth. The heat is also melting permafrost that supports roads, buildings, and other infrastructure across most of the state. Even trees are susceptible to softening ground, leading to the phenomenon of drunken forest. And you can see a picture here. They're leaning over there. It looks like a drunken forest. Let me just read this and I'll stop here. It kind of breaks my heart. They go into one section here about these penguins, and you see all of these I forget what they call them, alleys or something like that, but these penguins, they depend on the sea ice. The sea ice is at a great breakneck speed. It's reducing out into the ocean, and the sea ice is the place for breeding the krill that they eat and feed their young. And as it recedes, they can swim 3,500 miles during migrating season, one of the most phenomenal animals upon the earth. But they can't swim out to feed their young a long way. It has to be close by. And they're going to disappear. And the polar bear is on the endangered species list. And it all has to do with an upheaval in all of this system, the warming patterns. It causes their mating habits to change. It causes them to die off. It causes a problem in the babies that they cast and they breed. It's causing every kind of problem in nature that there is. And it's God that's doing it. This is like a horror book this month. And people say, you're a doomsday prophet. It's not doomsday to me. It's doomsday to you. Right? Although melting ice, I'm going to just read this and stop here. They've got a whole section on those penguins, and it's very sad. Very sad. I'll be glad when death's over, won't you? Although floating ice does not change sea level when it melts, scientists became concerned that the collapse could foreshadow the breakup of other ice shelves in Arctic and allow increased glacial discharge into the sea from ice sheets on the continent. If the West Antarctic ice sheet were to break up, which scientists consider very unlikely this century, they just considered it unlikely. And yet they're the ones that say this thing could go into a new mode and everything just start collapsing in front of it. It alone contains enough ice to raise sea level by nearly 20 feet. This is just one ice sheet in the Antarctic. The IPCC projected in its 2001 report that sea level will rise anywhere between 4 and 35 inches by the end of the century. The high end, that's just their guess. They're saying they don't even know how to predict. The high end of that projection, nearly 3 feet, would be an unmitigated disaster, according to Douglas. Down on the bayou, all these predictions make Wendell Carroll shudder. We're the guinea pigs, he says, surveying his aqueous world from the relatively lofty vantage point of a 12-foot high earthen berm. I don't think anybody down here looks at the sea level rise problem and puts their heads in the sand. Oceans, in effect, mimic some functions. He goes into it, the functions of the human circulatory system. Let me put this over here. Y'all really need to get that. It's like a horror novel. That's what it's like. We're headed toward the worst times that we've known in the world. That's because there's going to be distress of nations with perplexity. And in this population explosion, they've got a statement here. The 6 hottest years. This was printed in 1990. The 6 hottest years of the century were in the 1980s. I've got a paper, a USA Today, that came out in 1994, and it says, hottest year, 1994. Do you think these years are not hotter than that? It's getting hotter and hotter in America. They're setting all kinds of records out in Arizona. They out in Kingman, Arizona, I believe it was back about 3 years ago, they set a record right at 140 degrees. How'd you like to live there? Huh? I'm telling you, we're headed. And then I'll just read a little. This is out of the Greenhouse, the 200-year history of global warming. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that a 2-foot rise in sea level will eliminate between 17 and 43% of U.S. wetlands, with more than half the loss taking place in Louisiana alone. And it's going on, and this is the next 100 years. I'd take too long to read what they got in here. When the atmosphere warms, so does the surface temperature of the sea. When the atmosphere warms, so does the surface temperature of the sea. Do you know what's causing all these hurricanes? The surface temperature of the sea in the Atlantic coming over from Africa. It warms up as it comes its direction. That's what's causing it. The storms, known variously around the world as hurricanes, typhoons, and tropical storms, may increase in intensity. Well, guess what? They are. Isn't that funny? Huh? El Nino, yeah. They owe much of their energy to warm sea surface temperatures. In fact, they often cut themselves short before reaching maturity when the spinning, raging winds stir up cooler water from below the surface and kill the winds. And he goes on, there will be a general warming of upper layers of the sea, with biggest change coming, according to Emmanuel's preliminary estimates, in partially enclosed ocean basins like the Gulf of Mexico and the Bay of Bengal. In such places, hurricanes could be more powerful by as much as 60%, even with only a very slight warming of global sea surface temperatures. So if it heats up a lot, what are we going to have? 300, 350 mile-an-hour winds in a hurricane? And the hurricanes we had hit, what was it? Ivan had the fastest winds in the history of hurricanes hitting the Gulf. I believe it was Ivan. And then he says, with the warming, some parts of the country may become chronic hard luck cases. Supercomputers paint the future with such a broad brush that they cannot tell which state or nation state will be winner or loser. People who live along coastlines have special reasons for concern. Revell estimates conservatively that we will probably see a 1.5 foot rise in sea level in the next 100 years. It may come sooner than that.
Just yesterday in the news, they were talking about Mount St. Helens, the earthquakes are starting to tremble there because of the
You know what this is? This is the earth is having birth pangs, is what it is, isn't it? So, no, you think, hey, run for presidency on curing the sea and the waves roaring. I, as your president, I will stop the hurricanes from hitting South Florida, and if you will elect me, come on, you guys, get with it. That's what we need. We need this hurricane blowing all this nuclear dust on us. That's what. Stupid.
There was a theory on big fans and a bunch of stuff like
big
that.
Fans.
At the end, they go, but the scientists have not found any way that was biologically safe.
I guess not. They're going to drop an A-bomb in the middle of the. Yeah. Well, they're going to try to fix it. And the Bible says there'll be distress of nations with perplexity. And then we get back to, we're there, people. We're at the end of all things. We're not long for this world, are we? Besides that, I'm going to be dead in the very maximum of 20 years anyway. I can't live more than 85, huh? I would like to see it. I would like to be around when Jesus splits those skies and says, I'm back and I'm fixing everything. I want to. Well, it's amazing to me. These guys have got all the answers, and they can't fix any of these things. They can't fix war. They've got. I've said before, Jerry's done some study on the Trilateral Commission and these unilateral agreements throughout the world. And you can't start a war with these people because they trade with these people and we sell to these people. And they can't start a war with these people over here, back over yonder, because we sell to these people that sell to those people. And we can't fight. Nobody can fight anybody. And the thing is so complex, nobody understands it. It's all tied to money. And it's the emissions that we're putting into the air that's burning up the ozone that's causing this. There are three. In the greenhouse trap, they say there are three gases. There are three gases that have a molecular structure that will allow heat in, but will not allow heat to go out. One is carbon dioxide. One is methane gas. And you get methane gases out of the marshes of Louisiana and out of the marshes of Alabama, out of the marshes of southeast Texas, South Carolina. Huh? Yeah. And the fish are going to die in the sea, the Bible says. Well, why wouldn't they? And these scientists say that you've got that when the glaciers start melting, that in this ice there is methane gases, there's water vapor, and then you've got carbon dioxide. We're emitting all of this into the air. And it is causing the greenhouse warming. It will let the heat in, but those are trapping the heat in. Their molecular structure will not allow the heat to go out. I didn't say that. These scientists, I can't explain that. I can just tell you what these are not people that has an axe to grind, biblical axe to grind. These are scientists. It's what they are. They're telling you what's going to happen. And I didn't read some cult book. A while ago, I read out of the National Geographic this past month. And it reads scary, doesn't it? Huh? Yeah. 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 Well, we're headed towards, and you look at Middle Tennessee. We used to have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-inch snows here. We had 4, 5, or 6 of them a year. Big snows with big drifts. We don't have any anymore. If we get some flurries during a cold day, we're doing good. And if they say that Middle Tennessee hasn't heated up, I'm going to say, you guys are nuts. Certainly it's heated up. Yeah. Well, it's all heating up. And these guys are talking about if some of their predictions come true, there's going to be balmy weather in New York City in the middle of December. It's going to be Florida weather. And I don't like it. I don't feel like all this happening, but I look forward to it knowing that the judgment of God is coming. That's what we're headed towards. Yeah. Mike, how much time do I have? 23. Well, let me get on with some of the other signs. Is this kind of frightening to y'all? It doesn't scare me personally. It's kind of exciting. I hope it happens. I want to be here when this thing starts exploding, because I believe Al-Qaeda's coming. I believe they're going to bomb us. I believe they're going to blow us up. I believe that there's not going to be any cure for that, and they're going to come up with newer ideas rather than just kidnapping somebody. They're going to decide to come over here and say, well, we're going to turn one man loose on this neighborhood, and you're not going to know where it is, and we're going to have been killing 20 or 25 people in some upper neighborhood, and then you're going to find out we are going to win because we don't care if we die. They're going to come up with a lot more tricks, because they got nothing to lose. They believe in dying for their religion, and we don't. Huh? They have unlimited. How many people they got? If they wanted to put 1,000 soldiers on a ship and bring them over here and just turn them loose on New York City before they all were killed, what kind of damage do you think they could do? A whole lot more than blowing up 2 buildings. They're coming from every direction. I believe we're headed towards the end of time. We see the sword, uncurable. We see the famine, that's uncurable. We see the pestilence, it's uncurable. It's like I said earlier, when when Pat Robertson says, our Operation Blessing, we're going to feed the children in India. There are 1 billion people in India. And Pat Robertson feeding the children in India, I've said this before, it's like taking a crumb of bread when the birds out are migrating south for the winter, and it's like going out there and you see 1 million blackbirds and you got a crumb, say, I'm going to feed these birds out here. That's the same thing as Pat Robertson saying he's going to feed the children of India. That's insane. In India, which is a lot smaller than the United States, a little larger than the size of Texas or somewhere about that size, there are 1 billion people, 4 times as many people as we've got in the entire United States. How are you going to feed that? That's insane, is what it is. What? Okay, we'll read it. I get real distressed because people can't see and they're blind, and I know God's got them blind. What did you say, Mary? 21. Oh, okay. And take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting. The word overcharged is the word baruno, B-A-R-U-N-O. It means to be weighted down. That your hearts, your understanding, should be weighted down with surfeiting. The word surfeiting means to pale or have a headache as a seizure of pain due to drunkenness, due to gluttony. It's a hangover, it's what it is. From not drinking literal booze, but from being spiritually drunk. And drunkenness and the cares of this life. What happens when we get involved in the cares of this life? The cares of this life, so that day come upon you unawares. We're not the children of the darkness, that this day should overtake us. Jesus himself said that the day of the Lord will not come except I give you signs. And he said, when you see these things come to pass, know that it is nigh, even at the doors. When we see what things? Well, when we see the sun and the moon darkened, when we see the economy and the famine and the disease and the war and the ecological systems in an upheaval, when you see this, these are the signs that the Lord's... And when you see the Jewish rule by the Gentiles, let's put that down here. When we see the Gentile rule cease. Finis. Done. When you see that done, then know that it's all over and the end is right here at the door. And people say, yes, but nobody knows the day nor the hour, and they always like to go to Matthew 24. Okay, I'm going to. They like to go to Matthew 24, where as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be, in verse 37. But in verse 36, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But he says in verse 33, so likewise ye, when you shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Isn't that what it says? No man's going to know the exact time. That's what no man knows the day nor the hour. But it's near, even at the doors. If you don't want to talk to me about this, I don't want to talk to you at all. I can't go around my family who wants to talk about their vacations and their new wallpaper and their flower gardens. I'll talk about flower gardens with you, but most of the time I'm going to talk Bible. And if I can't talk about that with the end coming and all this, what's my family going to do? The winds are blowing like crazy and the houses are blowing away and we're hiding over behind some tree and here comes Al-Qaeda and disease is going everywhere and we're going, let's talk about where are you going on your vacation? Hey, the world's caving in.
We're in a war.
Yeah, we're in a war. Jerry likes that. When I made that statement on one of my tapes, I said, I'm out here in a war fighting a battle. And I got people trying to give me a hard time. Had a young guy here, 26 years old, 27, and he wants to write me letters and notes saying, you don't know nothing about the Greek, you don't know nothing about the Bible, and you're this and you're that. And when I feel like he's a gnat, I feel like he's a kid in his Corvette. I'm out here in the trenches in the war going, get your heads down, men. And he rides up in his Corvette and goes, oh, Jim, I got a date. Can you lend me $20? And I'm saying, get your head down. We're in a war. And he says, you don't love me anymore. I mean, the world's caving in. The weather's caving in. The economy's caving in. War is caving in. And all these guys have got the answer. George Bush don't have an answer for nothing, and neither does John Kerry. I think they ought to elect both of them. We ought to watch both of them make a disaster. Let one rule one day and the other rule the next. Just do this. Turn about. It's fair play. You can, okay, you get... But I want that extra day of the year. Now, we're going to go by the Jewish calendar. Y'all get... All right. Now, where was I? Back over here. And the cares of life, so that day shall come upon you as a thief, unawares. For as a snare shall it come on them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. Watch ye therefore, and pray always, that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man, because that's what we're going to do. And Jesus is going to come back. He's going to split the skies. And you know when he's going to split the skies? When everything is undone and all your work is not finished, and you're going to be on your way to pay your light bill, and you're going to be on your way to pay your house note, and hey, I got my last payment in the checkbook, and I'm fixing to pay my car, zap, it's over. And while you've got an ache or a pain, I got to go see the doctor, and I got to wash the kids' clothes. Well, I'm sorry, you don't have time before eternity to do it. Yeah. He's going to stop all of this. He's not going to have an ending like a movie. It's not going to be an ending. I mean, movies are stupid. It's like, look at there. I've always wondered about riding down the street and say, what's happening over there? Where they having an ending? We think that God is going to finish up everything for everybody, don't we think that? It ain't going to finish. He's going to stop us right in the middle of everything and say, it's finished, it's over. Well, wouldn't that be great to happen? Now, we kind of have had just fun talking. I do too. I feel good about it. And you know, it's serious. People ask me all the time, does this, after I preached on the Christ Mass this morning, several people come up and said, does this bother you? You know all this stuff? I said, yeah. It bothers me every day. I know all these things. I can't talk to my sister, my brother-in-law, and my brothers, and my mother, and my sister-in-laws, and my brother-in-laws. I can't talk to them. They don't talk about this, and the world's falling down around our ears. Well, my family's scared of me. They know if they listen to me, they're going to have to face some things, so they just don't want to do it. All right. Now, one of the last things that we're talking about here is the Gentile rule over the Jews, and number 7 here. How about that for a final number I'll talk about? Number 7. Number 7, the way we're going to know the end of time, that's what we're talking about. The way we're going to know the end of time is that there's going to be an attack upon the church, and I believe, and Israel. Attack upon the church and Israel. Now, no one can cure. I said this last week. No one is going to cure this. George Bush and Colin Powell and Donald Rumsfeld, they're trying to cure this. That little nation there. And Israel, if you're Orthodox Jew, and you take the book of the law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, then you know that God said, Jehovah God said, the land is mine, there in the 25th chapter of Leviticus. And he said, it will not be sold to anyone, even among the tribes of the Israelites. It can't be sold. And they're negotiating to give the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, they're negotiating it to give it to the Palestinians to have a state of their own, to give it to them. I keep saying this. Any prime minister of Israel who does that is going to be killed by an Orthodox Jew because they believe in the book of the law. There is no answer for that. It's not going to happen. And the whole reason that the United States is involved in Colin Powell and these guys, and the reason they're calling meetings with these prime ministers and they're getting the different ones over there, and the reason that they got the new prime minister of Iraq that they've set up as a, reminds me of Babylon setting up puppet kings in Israel, like Jehoiakim. But the reason they're doing that, the reason Bush and these guys are involved in it, is to try to negotiate a land for the Palestinians. And any Orthodox Jews saying it ain't going to happen, will kill any man who does it. And they're saying the same thing that Al-Qaeda is saying, I will die for my belief. I will kill the prime minister if I have to walk up to him in the middle of one of his ceremonies and blow his brains out and say, here I am, take me in. I did what was right. And they believe, I'm not saying it's right, but that's what they believe. So these guys are willing to die for what they believe, and Israel's willing to die for what they believe. And we're over there trying to negotiate a peace. That's impossible. It's not going to happen. It's crazy, isn't it? And do we believe all of this is going to happen without all these Arabs attacking Israel before it's over with? No, they're going to attack. And because we're siding with Israel, they're going to attack us. There's no way out. We're in a quandary. It ain't going to happen. Let's go back over to, I don't know if I got any time. How much time, Mike? 8 minutes. I'll just go back and read a little bit of this. Here's an attack upon, let me go over to Zechariah, and we'll just read this chapter. Go to Zechariah. This is kind of a just open discussion thing tonight, whatever you want to say. I hope that I get excited when I see hurricanes and tornadoes. I get excited in thunderstorms. I like it when God's nature stops all men in their tracks, because if you've ever been in a hurricane, everybody is level to the same thing, because nobody's money matters in a hurricane. I've been in a hurricane. I was in Hurricane Audrey back in 1957 when I was in high school, and it hit Beaumont, and that's where 400 people were killed in Cameron, Louisiana. And I was in that, and it levels every man. Nobody gets to be Mr. Big Shot. Everybody's going around and going, what are we going to do? The bank president, where's my wife? You know. The lawyers are going, where are we? What do we go do now? Huh? And they don't know, and they're not big shots anymore, and their money doesn't mean nothing. Yeah. And being a big shot don't mean nothing then. Wait till God makes all this stuff explode and the stock market crashes and God sends all of these storms and disease and there's no way out. I want to look at the fancy pigs. Hey, I thought you was fancy. You know. I knew I wasn't fancy. I'm going to sit over here and wait till God kills me or something happens, and I just want to watch you. Yeah. I'd like to see him. Wouldn't you like to see him while the judgments of God are falling on the earth? Look here in Zechariah. Look here in Zechariah, the next to the last book of the Old Testament, and look here in chapter 12. I'll just read this. Chapter 12, verse 1. The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens, and layeth the foundation of the earth, and formeth the spirit of man within him. How's that for predestination? Behold, I will make Jerusalem, we're talking about Jerusalem being trodden down of the Gentiles. I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about. It is a cup of trembling, isn't it? Everybody is scared. To drink of a cup was meant to undergo a severe ordeal. And God says, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about when they shall be in the siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem. This is talking about when Jerusalem is camped by armies. The ones that I'm going to make it a cup of trembling, they're not going to know what to do with Jerusalem. I'll make them pass Jerusalem from one nation to the other like a piece of hot coal. Here, I can't handle them, you handle them. And that's what went on for the last 2,000 years. And in that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut to pieces. And I believe that's also a prophecy about the church. Church is spiritual, heavenly Jerusalem, the church of the firstborn. That is spiritual Jerusalem. Though all the people of the earth shall be gathered together against it. All the people of the earth shall be gathered together against Jerusalem. I believe all the people of the earth are going to be gathered together against the church. And you know what? We're against literal Israel because the United States is not giving them truth. You can be against somebody more than one way. We're wanting to take over the world. If there's been a nation that wants to manifest destiny and have globalization where we're the rulers, there's nobody been worse than us. Not Adolf Hitler, not the Soviets, not Joseph Stalin, not Napoleon. We want to force the world to accept democracy and capitalism so they can be free in their sin like us. In that day, saith the Lord, I will smite every horse with astonishment and his rider with madness. I will open mine eyes upon the house of Judah and will smite every horse of the people with blindness. He's talking about everything that comes against Judah, and the horsemen were one of the most dangerous things of the day in their armies. So he's talking about any armies that come against them, any of the forces that come against them, to smite them with blindness. They can't see the truth. And the governors of Judah shall say in their heart, the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be my strength in the Lord of hosts, their God. In that day will I make thee governors of Judah like an hearth of fire among the wood, and like a torch of fire in a sheaf. Did not Jeremiah say in Jeremiah the 5th chapter, is not my word of fire and Israel is wood? And I'll burn them up with my word, and they shall devour all the people round about on the right hand and on the left, and Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place, even in Jerusalem. Now, we jump to the end of time right there. Because they had, at this point, they had inhabited Jerusalem, and they didn't inhabit it up to the time of Christ. They weren't even you say the Jews were in Jerusalem. It was the Romans that were ruling in Jerusalem. Pilate was a Roman representative. So was Herod in northern Israel. The Lord also shall save the tents of Judah first, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Judah. Well, he certainly saved Judah during the days of Jesus, but northern Israel hasn't been saved as of this point. In that day shall the Lord defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and he that is feeble among them at that day shall be as David, and the house of David shall be as God, as the angel of the Lord before them. And it shall come to pass in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that came against Jerusalem. This is the end of time. God has not sought up to this time, or even during the days of Jesus, to destroy all the nations that came against Jerusalem. And he's certainly talking about all that time from the time that he leveled Jerusalem with Nebuchadnezzar. And the reason he brings out Jerusalem so much and the judgment on Jerusalem is because that's where the temple was, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant was. And that's where God came down and set up on the Ark of the Covenant, where they worshipped him from. And I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplications. That's certainly talking about the church there. And they shall look upon him, upon me, whom they have pierced. So this is talking about future, looking back to the days of Jesus' crucifixion, isn't it? This has to be after, it has to be after the first century, doesn't it? Well, he hasn't rescued them any time after the first century until May of 48, June of 67. And they shall look upon him whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son. We're skipping to the end of time here, aren't we? And shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. And we know Jerusalem hasn't done that. I believe this does apply to the church, but I believe at the end of time we're going to see the time clock, which is literal Jerusalem. In that day there shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem, as the mourning of Hadad Rimmon in the valley of Megiddon. It means, the word Megiddon means rendezvous. It's a rendezvous. That is the valley of Megiddo. Or Har-Megiddo. Har means mountain, the mountain of Megiddo. And the land shall mourn every family apart. That word is the word bad, B-A-D. Apart, B-A-D, it means separated. God says, I'm going to separate every family in Israel. The house of David separated, their wives separated. The family of the house of Nathan separated, their wives separated. The family of the house of Levi separated, and their wives separated. The family of Shimei separated, and their wives separated. And all the families that remain, every family separated, and their wives separated. God says, that's what I'm going to do at the end of time. I'm going to separate these people at the end of time. In the next chapter, he talks about what's going to happen. The next two chapters, he talks about I believe it's coming towards the end of time as you read chapter 13 and 14. I'd like to tie these in. I was going to go into this week. I was going to go into Armageddon, the attack of the church by Gog and Magog for the last 3.5 years of the 70th week of Daniel, 70 weeks. But I'll come back next week and do that. I believe I'm out of time. We kind of had just a good session here just to talk back and forth. And I hope this is sobering to you, because it sure is to me. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for truth. God, sober us as believers to be willing to face what's coming. Lord, you put this in my heart. You put it in our hearts to converse this daily, everywhere we go. We know our families don't seem to want it. The world doesn't want it. The preachers don't want it. The politicians don't want it. Everywhere we turn, people turn away from your truth. God, deal with us. Give us such conviction we'll open our mouths and be crucified for it. God, we will praise you. Just give us strength to do that. And Lord, in giving you praise, we're going to tell people that you're the cause of all of this. And we glorify you in all of these things that's happening. In all of these unanswerable questions that man doesn't have an answer for. We know it is your perplexity. It's your aporia. It is your marpe, your situation that has no cure. And the only cure will be when Jesus comes and splits the skies, and he'll fix everything immediately. Thank you for letting us see these things. And God will praise you and glorify you. In Christ's name we pray, amen.